Did you know that long before dating apps and social media, people were already masters of deception in the game of love? Imagine a time when a simple marriage could change your entire life, your family's fortune, and even the fate of a kingdom. In the medieval period, from roughly the 11th to the 15th centuries, suitors weren't just showing up with flowers. They were spinning elaborate tales, making grand promises, and sometimes, well, stretching the truth more than a knight stretches before a joust. So what were the most common tall tales spun by medieval suitors, hoping to win a hand, a heart, or a hefty dowry? Number 9. The promise of unimaginable wealth. A medieval suitor might look into the eyes of a potential bride and declare, "My coffers overflow, my lands stretch beyond sight, and my future wealth will dwarf kings." This was a bold claim in an era where land was not just property, but the very foundation of power and prestige. For a family considering a marriage, the wealth of the suitor was often the first and most critical piece of information. They wanted to know about acres, tenants, livestock, and the annual yield of grain. In a society deeply stratified, where your place was determined by birth and holdings, a marriage was often less about personal affection and more about a strategic alliance. Dowries were critical, given by the bride's family to the groom, while dower was the portion of the groom's property set aside for his wife. Should she become a widow, both were meticulously negotiated and legally binding. If a suitor exaggerated his wealth, he was messing with the core economic stability of two families. A suitor might claim his ancestral lands were vast, encompassing forests, rivers, and fertile fields, when in reality his estates might be barren, poorly managed, or even heavily mortgaged. He could talk about the dozens of villages under his sway, implying a steady stream of rents and labor, when perhaps half of them were deserted due to plague or famine, or their tenants were rebellious. He might boast of valuable mines of silver or iron on his property, suggesting an untapped fortune when at best there were small, unprofitable veins. The Domesday Book, commissioned by William the Conqueror in 1085, serves as a stark reminder of how meticulously land and its assets were surveyed for taxation and control. While not a tool for suitors' lies, it shows how central accurate information about wealth was to medieval governance and thus to marriage negotiations. Sometimes a suitor would claim his lands were freehold, meaning he owned them outright without obligations to a higher lord, giving him complete control. In truth, they might be feudal tenure, burdened with duties like providing knights for military service or paying annual dues. This deception could lead to the bride's family inheriting not a fortune, but a host of feudal obligations and debts. Stories from chronicles like those concerning impoverished knights seeking wealthy heiresses highlight this dynamic. A knight returning from a crusade with little more than his sword and a grand reputation might desperately need a wealthy match to restore his fortunes. He might embellish tales of his potential inheritances from distant ailing relatives, or the bountiful harvests he expects from lands he has only just acquired through a disputed claim. The scrutiny of such claims was intense. Families would send their own trusted scouts, stewards, or even learned scribes to inspect the suitor's properties. They would question his vassals, tenants, and neighbors. They would examine charters and legal documents, though forgery was not unheard of. If the suitor's boasts were found to be empty, the consequences could be severe. A broken betrothal could lead to costly legal battles in church courts, or even to violent feuds between the two families. A marriage contracted under false pretenses could be annulled, bringing public shame upon the suitor and potentially harming the reputation of the deceived bride. The true measure of a suitor's wealth lay not in his grand pronouncements, but in the detailed accounts of his land and revenue, which were far harder to conjure out of thin air. Number 8. The grandeur of one's ancestry. Another common declaration from a hopeful suitor might have been, "My lineage boasts kings, saints, and heroes. Our blood runs pure through generations of power." In the medieval world, your bloodline was your identity, your social standing, and often your claim to everything you possessed. Genealogy was not just a hobby. It was a matter of survival, legitimacy, and supreme importance in establishing one's place in the intricate web of feudal society. Noble families often possessed elaborate, sometimes stretching back to legendary figures like Charlemagne, or even, in truly audacious cases, to ancient Roman emperors or Trojan heroes. The Gesta Romanorum, a popular collection of moralizing tales from the late 13th century, often emphasized noble lineage and the virtues associated with it, providing a backdrop for such grand pronouncements. Heralds, whose job it was to track and register coats of arms, were also keepers of genealogical records, and their scrutiny could make or break a suitor's claim. A suitor might claim direct descent from a historically significant figure, perhaps a renowned warrior from the Crusades or a powerful baron who advised a king. He might speak of distant kinship with a reigning monarch or a prominent ducal family, hinting at connections that would provide protection, favor, and social ascent for his future bride. Perhaps he would mention a family member who was canonized as a saint, hoping to imbue his own family with an aura of divine favor and moral standing. These claims, even if embellished, could make a suitor appear far more influential and desirable. The reality, however, might be that his connection was tenuous, through a long-forgotten branch or entirely fabricated. Many ambitious families in the medieval period hired genealogists, sometimes called pedigree makers, to improve their family tree, adding legendary ancestors or forging connections to more powerful houses. This practice became so prevalent that certain families were known for their questionable genealogies. For the family of the potential bride, investigating the suitor's ancestry was paramount. They needed to ensure the legitimacy of any claims to titles, lands, or positions. Marrying into a family with a disputed claim or a history of rebellion could be disastrous, dragging the bride's family into political strife or legal battles. Furthermore, marrying someone of a significantly lower social standing, despite claims of grand lineage, could lower the entire family's prestige. The social scrutiny of lineage extended beyond mere titles. It concerned the character and reputation of the family. If a suitor's family had a history of debt, treachery, or ill repute, these factors could outweigh even genuine noble connections. A family might investigate if the suitor was truly a direct heir, or if his claim to the family lands was tenuous, perhaps through an illegitimate line or a distant, contested relation. In a system where inheritance was determined by blood, any question mark over lineage could lead to endless legal disputes and uncertainty for future generations. Chronicles and court records often detail the protracted legal battles over inheritance, demonstrating the deep concern over authentic lineage. The suitor's grand tales of ancestral glory, while captivating, ultimately needed to be backed by verifiable documents, the testimony of reputable individuals, and the approval of the heralds themselves. Number 7. Tales of extraordinary bravery and martial prowess. A suitor might lean in conspiratorially and declare, "My sword has tasted the blood of 100 foes. I have defended the realm against impossible odds. My name whispered with awe on the battlefield." In an era dominated by the ideals of chivalry, where a knight's honor was everything, tales of martial prowess were powerful currency. These claims played into the widespread romanticization of warfare and heroism, fueled by popular Arthurian romances and chansons de geste. For a potential bride and her family, a suitor's reputation for bravery and skill in combat was incredibly appealing. It suggested he could protect his household, defend his lands, and lead his vassals effectively. Medieval life was dangerous, and a strong protector was highly valued. Tournaments were staged to demonstrate a knight's prowess, offering a relatively safe arena for combat skills to be displayed and reputations to be forged. Winning the tournament could elevate a knight's status dramatically, and participation alone provided material for boasting. A suitor might claim to have single-handedly overcome a band of brigands or to have fought bravely in a significant battle, perhaps even a crusade, capturing a high-ranking enemy knight for ransom. He might describe epic duels, where he emerged victorious against overwhelming odds. These stories, often embellished with dramatic flair, could easily capture the imagination. For instance, a knight who participated in the Battle of Crécy or Agincourt, even if he merely stood in the ranks, might later claim to have been at the forefront, personally slaying many French or English opponents. Jean Froissart's chronicles are filled with detailed accounts of such battles, often highlighting individual deeds of valor that could inspire a suitor's embellished narratives. The reality, however, could be quite different. The suitor might have been present at a battle but spent the majority of it hiding, or perhaps he exaggerated a minor skirmish into a heroic epic. He might have paid a ransom for a low-ranking prisoner and claimed it was a captured noble. The tales from romances, like those of Lancelot or Tristan, provided a template for such fantastic deeds, making them seem plausible to a credulous audience. The consequences of being found out could be severe. A direct challenge to a knight's bravery could lead to a demand for a trial by combat, a dangerous undertaking. More often, it would result in public ridicule and social ostracization. A knight known as a coward or a braggart would struggle to gain trust or attract followers. His reputation would be ruined, making it difficult to find a suitable marriage match, obtain loans, or secure alliances. The verification process for such claims often relied on eyewitnesses, fellow knights, squires, or even bards who traveled between courts. While bards could sometimes be persuaded to exaggerate for a fee, their professional reputation depended on a certain degree of accuracy. Families would inquire about a suitor's performance in past campaigns or tournaments. They would listen for consistent stories from various sources. A suitor's claims, while exciting, needed to be corroborated by the hard-won respect of his peers, not just the poetic license of his own narration. Truly brave and skilled warrior earned his renown through action, not just words, and the medieval world was adept at distinguishing between the two, even if it took time. Number 6. Promises of absolute fidelity and undying devotion. Then there was the fervent declaration, "My heart beats for you alone, and no other shall ever share my affections or my bed." In a society where marriage was often a political or economic arrangement, this promise of absolute fidelity and singular devotion was a potent, often insincere tool in a suitor's arsenal. While the Church strongly advocated for monogamy within marriage, the reality of medieval life, particularly for men of noble standing, often diverged significantly. The concept of courtly love, popularized by troubadours and poets, often involved a knight's idealized devotion to a lady who was frequently married to someone else. This form of love was more about spiritual yearning and heroic deeds performed in the lady's honor rather than a commitment to a spouse. A suitor might echo the grand poetic declarations of courtly love, using flowery language to express an undying affection, even if his actual intentions for marriage were purely practical, gaining land alliances or simply producing an heir. The Roman de la Rose, a hugely influential 13th century allegorical poem, explored the complexities of love and desire, often in ways that highlighted the gap between romantic ideals and marital realities. Many medieval nobles, including kings, maintained concubines or mistresses and often acknowledged their illegitimate children. While the Church condemned adultery, the societal repercussions for men were often far less severe than for women. A man might promise lifelong fidelity to his potential wife, knowing full well he had an existing mistress or even children from a previous liaison that he had no intention of abandoning. He might even be secretly betrothed to another woman, or in more extreme cases, already secretly married. Such pre-contracts or clandestine marriages were a major legal and religious issue, as they could invalidate a new union. The church's canon law on marriage was strict, emphasizing consent and the exclusive nature of the marital bond. However, enforcing these laws could be difficult, especially across different lordships or kingdoms. A suitor might travel to a new region, present himself as unattached, and make solemn vows of fidelity, deliberately hiding a previous commitment that would render his current promises null and void. For the bride's family, the purity of the lineage was paramount, making female fidelity crucial to ensure the legitimacy of heirs. While male fidelity was also desirable, it was often overlooked as long as heirs were produced and property secured. However, a suitor who demonstrated a pattern of broken promises or serial infidelity might be seen as unreliable, potentially creating scandal or leaving his wife in a vulnerable position should he abandon her or prove himself untrustworthy. The consequences of being found out could vary. If a suitor was discovered to be already married, the new marriage would be annulled, leading to profound shame for all involved, especially for the deceived bride, whose honor might be questioned. If he was simply known to be unfaithful, it could lead to gossip and a strained marital relationship. While noblemen often had considerable leeway in their personal lives, the lie of absolute fidelity, especially when made to a potential bride and her family, was a powerful emotional lever, often pulled without genuine intent, reflecting a deeper societal double standard regarding marital expectation. Number 5. Claims of unblemished reputation and sterling character. "My name is spoken with reverence throughout the land," a suitor might confidently assert, "and my character is as pure as the driven snow." In the tightly knit communities of the medieval world, reputation was not merely a social nicety. It was a foundational pillar of one's standing, creditworthiness, and eligibility. An individual's good name was his most valuable asset, opening doors to alliances, loans, and crucially, a desirable marriage. A suitor might present himself as a paragon of virtue. Pious, honorable, generous, and just. He might claim to be a devout Christian, attending Mass regularly and making generous donations to the church, when in reality he engaged in usury, gambled excessively, or even participated in banditry. He could portray himself as a wise and fair lord, beloved by his tenants and vassals when he was in fact a tyrant, prone to violence, or deeply in debt. Legal documents from the period, such as court records detailing defamation suits, demonstrate how seriously people took their reputation and how easily it could be damaged by false accusations or by legitimate scandals. The challenges of verifying a suitor's character were significant, especially if he came from a distant region. Information traveled slowly, often by word of mouth, and was easily distorted by gossip, rumor, or the deliberate spread of misinformation by rivals. A suitor could exploit this by hiding a past plagued by debt, a history of cowardice and battle, a conviction for a minor crime, or even involvement in a family feud that branded him an enemy. For a potential bride and her family, discovering a suitor's true character after the marriage could be devastating. Marrying a man known for his dishonor could tarnish the family's own reputation, making it harder for younger siblings to marry well. A dishonest suitor might squander the dowry, default on his obligations, or embroil his new family in his past troubles. A man of poor character might also prove to be a cruel or neglectful husband, bringing misery and insecurity to his wife. Church, through its courts, played a role in enforcing moral standards, though its reach and effectiveness varied. Accusations of heresy, blasphemy, or serious moral failings could completely disqualify a suitor. However, many character flaws such as excessive pride, deceit, or avarice, while frowned upon, were harder to prove or prosecute. Sumptuary laws, which dictated what people could wear based on their social status, also indirectly served as public declarations of status and character. Families would often send emissaries to the suitor's home region to discreetly inquire about his standing among his peers, his financial habits, and his general behavior. They would consult local clergy, merchants who had dealt with him, and other noble families. The suitor's claims of sterling character, while impressive, had to stand up to the rigorous, if often informal, scrutiny of a society where reputation was everything, and a tarnished name could ruin not just a man, but his entire household. Number 4. The promise of a swift and grand wedding. A suitor eager to seal the deal might promise, "Our wedding shall be celebrated within weeks, with feasts and merriment fit for royalty, without a single obstacle in our path." This was a bold assertion given the often lengthy and complex nature of medieval marriage negotiations. A grand wedding, with lavish feasts, entertainment, and a multitude of important guests, signified status and power. It was a public declaration of a new alliance, and a swift one suggested enthusiasm and a lack of complications. In reality, marriage negotiations were intricate diplomatic undertakings. They involved detailed discussions about the dowry from the bride's family, the dower from the groom's, and the precise settlement of lands, inheritances, and future provisions. Marriage contracts were often lengthy documents, meticulously outlining every clause, ensuring that both families were protected financially and legally. These negotiations could drag on for months, or even years, as families haggled over every detail. Beyond the financial aspects, there were often complex legal and religious requirements. For example, if the prospective bride and groom were distantly related, even through an ancestor from several generations back, a papal dispensation might be required from the church to permit the marriage. Obtaining such a dispensation involved petitions, payments, and considerable delays, often lasting many months as messengers traveled to and from Rome. Chronicles describing royal weddings, such as the marriage of Edward I of England to Eleanor of Castile, highlight the immense logistical efforts and the prolonged negotiations involved, demonstrating the vast difference between a suitor's promise and the reality for even the most powerful families. Furthermore, the logistical challenges of organizing a grand wedding were immense. Inviting guests from distant regions, sourcing vast quantities of food and drink, arranging for musicians, jesters, and other entertainers, and preparing appropriate lodging for hundreds of people required meticulous planning and considerable time. A suitor might promise a magnificent celebration, implying he had the resources and foresight to arrange it quickly, when he had neither the funds nor the connections. A suitor might claim to have already secured all necessary permissions, funds, and arrangements, when in fact he had done none of it. He might be trying to rush the marriage to escape financial trouble, to secure a quick alliance, or simply because he was impatient. However, if these claims were false, the consequences could be significant. A broken betrothal, especially after formal spousals de purturu, a promise to marry in the future, or spousals de praesenti, a declaration of marriage in the present, often legally binding even without a priest, could lead to severe legal penancies. Families often exercised extreme caution. They would consult legal advisors and church officials to ensure all requirements were met. They would send their own agents to verify the suitor's arrangements. The suitor's grand pronouncements about a swift, magnificent wedding, while tempting, ultimately had to contend with the cumbersome legal, logistical, and religious realities of marriage in the medieval world, which rarely accommodated spontaneous grand gestures. Number 3. Assurances of perfect health and a long life. With a hearty cough, perhaps, a suitor might claim, "I am as hale as an oak, and my robust constitution promises many decades of shared happiness and many sturdy sons." This was a comforting promise in an era where life expectancy was brutally short and chronic illness or sudden death was a constant specter. For a prospective bride and her family, the suitor's health was of paramount importance. A healthy suitor promised not just a long partnership, but also the ability to fulfill his marital duties, manage his estates, defend his household, and crucially produce healthy heirs. medieval society was ravaged by diseases that are now rare or treatable. Consumption, known today as tuberculosis, was widespread and often fatal. Leprosy, though less common than feared, was a terrifying and highly stigmatized condition. Smallpox, dysentery, and various fevers could sweep through a population, leaving widespread illness and death. Even common injuries could become fatal due to infection. Medical treatises of the time, such as those from the Salerno School of Medicine or Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, show an awareness of various ailments, though treatments were often rudimentary. A suitor might hide a chronic illness that severely impacted his strength or mobility. He might conceal a physical disability that rendered him incapable of managing his household or participating in warfare. He might be suffering from a hereditary condition, such as gout or various humoral imbalances, that would likely plague him throughout his life and potentially be passed on to his children. Impotence was also a serious concern, as it could prevent the production of heirs, a primary purpose of medieval marriage, and was often grounds for annulment. The urgency to produce heirs was immense. Without legitimate male heirs, a family's lineage could die out, and its lands and titles could pass to distant relatives, or even revert to the crown. Therefore, concerns about a suitor's fertility and the likelihood of him producing healthy offspring were often investigated discreetly. Consequences of marrying a suitor with hidden health issues could be severe. A swift widowhood would leave the bride vulnerable, potentially subject to the whims of her husband's family or in-laws, or forced to remarry quickly. If the suitor was too ill to manage his estates, the family's fortunes could decline. If his children inherited his ailments or were sickly, the future of the lineage could be jeopardized. Families often made discreet inquiries about a suitor's health history, seeking information from his physicians, his household staff, or even his neighbors. They would look for signs of chronic ailments, physical frailty, or a family history of debilitating diseases. While a medieval physician's diagnosis might not be as precise as a modern one, obvious signs of illness or infirmity were hard to conceal for long. The suitor's assurances of perfect health, while comforting to hear, were often weighed against the grim realities of medieval life and the vigilant scrutiny of families determined to secure a strong and viable match. Number 2. Claims of royal or papal favor and influence. A suitor might puff out his chest and confidently state, "The king himself seeks my counsel, and the pope holds me in his special regard. My word carries weight in the highest courts." In the medieval world, access to powerful figures like the monarch or the pope was an enormous advantage. Such connections promised not just prestige, but also tangible benefits: protection from enemies, preferential treatment in legal disputes, grants of land or office, and the ability to influence major decisions. Medieval society operated on networks of patronage and allegiance. Lords depended on their vassals, kings on their nobles, and all sought the blessing or intervention of the church. A suitor claiming close ties to the king suggested he had a direct line to royal justice, military support, or lucrative positions. He might hint that he could secure a royal charter for a new market, ensure favorable rulings in land disputes, or even obtain a powerful office for a family member of his future bride. Matthew Paris, a 13th century English chronicler, often detailed the intricate relationships between kings, nobles, and the church, illustrating how vital, powerful connections were. Similarly, claiming papal favor meant a suitor could potentially influence church appointments, obtain dispensations for difficult marriages, or even gain an advantage in ecclesiastical legal battles. Papal Curia, the administrative body of the Holy See, was a powerful center of influence, and a suitor who claimed a direct channel to it was indeed presenting himself as highly influential. The reality, however, might be far less grand. The suitor might be a distant acquaintance of a royal advisor, or perhaps he once attended a royal banquet and exchanged a few words with the monarch. exaggerating this brief encounter into an ongoing intimate relationship. He might have contributed a small sum to a church project and used this as a basis for claiming special regard from the Pope or a powerful cardinal. He might even have once served in a minor capacity in a royal household or an ecclesiastical court, spinning this into a tale of significant personal influence. The dangers of such a lie were considerable. If the suitor's claims were investigated and found to be false, he risked not only public humiliation but also incurring the wrath of the very powerful figures he claimed to be close to. Impersonating or falsely claiming intimacy with a king or the Pope was a serious offense, potentially leading to imprisonment, disinheritance, or worse. For the bride's family, marrying someone whose boasts were empty could lead to profound disappointment and a lack of the promised advantages. They might find themselves vulnerable to enemies, unable to secure desired positions, and lacking the crucial political protection they had hoped for. Families would often discreetly inquire through their own channels at court or with church officials. They would observe how the suitor was received by royal or papal envoys, if any. The suitor's claims of powerful connections, while alluring, ultimately needed to be substantiated by actual influence, demonstrated by the actions and words of the powerful individuals themselves, not just the suitor's grand pronouncements. Number 1. The promise of eternal safety and protection. Finally, a suitor might declare, "With me, you will be safe from all dangers, protected within walls no enemy can breach, and by a sword no foe can withstand." This was perhaps one of the most comforting and deeply desired promises in the treacherous medieval world. Life was inherently insecure. Warfare, whether large-scale dynastic conflicts or localized feuds between lords, was frequent. Banditry was a constant threat on roads and in forests. Disease, famine, and natural disasters added to the precariousness of daily existence. For a woman and her family, the suitor's ability to provide safety was a crucial consideration, transcending mere wealth or status. A suitor might exaggerate the strength of his fortifications, claiming his castle walls were impenetrable, his moats impassable, and his keep unbreachable. He might boast of a standing army of loyal, battle-hardened vassals who would fight to the death for him, when in reality his fighting force was small, poorly equipped, or disloyal. He could inflate his own military prowess, presenting himself as an invincible warrior, a strategic genius who had never lost a battle. Accounts of sieges, like those described in the Gesta Hungarorum, or military treatises of the time, like Vegesias de Re Militari, illustrate that no fortification was truly impregnable, and military outcomes were often uncertain. The reality of medieval warfare meant that even the strongest castles could fall through siege, treachery, or prolonged starvation. Vassals could defect, and even the most skilled warrior could be overwhelmed or outmaneuvered. A suitor might promise a life of serene security, hiding the fact that his lands were strategically vulnerable, bordering a powerful enemy, or prone to frequent raids. He might be deeply unpopular with his neighbors, making him a constant target for feuds despite his claims of peace. Consequences of a suitor's failure to protect could be dire. His new wife could face abduction, rape, or forced marriage if her husband's defenses failed. Her lands and dowry could be lost to marauders or rival lords. Her children could be taken hostage or killed. The ultimate failure of protection could mean personal tragedy, loss of property, and a total collapse of the family's security. Families would often conduct their own assessments of a suitor's defenses. They would inquire about his strategic alliances, how well he maintained his fortifications, and the loyalty of his men. They would consider the history of conflict in his region. While the suitor's promises of eternal safety and protection offered a seductive vision of a peaceful future, the harsh realities of medieval life often expose the limits of any man's ability to provide absolute security. and wise families understood that even the bravest words needed to be backed by verifiable strength.